this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Moore. There are so many times in life where we're in the middle of whatever it is, tough times that we're going through, maybe even happy times. We sit back and say, you know what? I wish I knew what the future held. I wish that I could reach through the veil, if you will, and try to predict my next move. Well, how am I going to spend the time that I have? Let's just say, and a lot of people wonder this, I think they're out there, when am I going to pass on? When is my life going to come to an end? And isn't it amazing? If you were armed with that information, what exactly would you do? Well, today, we actually have an individual who knows when she's going to pass on. The question is, what's she going to do with the time she has left? I'm right now referring to the murderer, the killer of Colleen Slemmer. Her name is Christa Pike. The grains of sand are trickling through the hourglass as I speak right now. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. So many times, Dave, in my life, I've, and it's always, we have no other choice. It's always retrospectively, you're sitting there and you're thinking, wow, if I had that to do over again, I probably would not have made that decision, or I would have, tried to do better, or I never would have put myself in that position. But it's an interesting set of circumstances that you're in, I think, in life, where you know that the terminus rests ahead, and you can almost see it over the crest of the next hill. And Miss Pike has put herself in that position, Dave, from arguably one of the most horrific cases, I think. Mm-hmm. Perhaps there's another one that actually rivals that we've previously covered on Body Bags, but one of the most horrific cases perhaps in Tennessee history, Dave.
Well, January 12th, 1995, Christa Pike lured someone she saw as a romantic rival in their Job Corps situation. Her name, Colleen Slemmer. Woman's 19 years old. They're both at Job Corps, but Christa Pike thinks or believes that Colleen has eyes for Christa's boyfriend, so she puts a game in play. Going to lure this girl out, and based on what took place, Joe, it wasn't to scare her. It wasn't to threaten her, because based on what we know took place, which I have questions for you today. We have covered this story on Body Bags previously, but I want to get right into the murder of Colleen Slemmer and what Christa Pike did to her that night. Because on the outside looking in, you were thinking maybe it was a threat that got out of hand. Hey, you're hitting on my boyfriend. Stay away from him. I don't want to hear any more about this. You stay away from my man. And that it got out of hand. That's kind of the way it gets positioned. But based on what we know took place and the time after it, thankfully, if you're a death penalty proponent, this is the one you look at. This is the person you should look at. But I'm still shocked and saddened that it has taken. If we're going to have the death penalty, why does it take 30 years, Joe?
Yeah. And it has.
What's the point?
Yeah, it has taken. Well, there's no deterrent. There's no deterrent factor any longer. Right. It's not one of these things where we're doing this to deter future crimes such as this. Really? Is that what you're going to tell me? Because I got to tell you, it just doesn't seem like much of a deterrent. And we've talked about this. We've covered wow, we've dipped our toe in waters that most people, I think, don't necessarily go down the road of, because you and I had come to an agreement some time ago that we would cover capital punishment, or the end result of their decisions that they made that led to them being, killed by the state, these perpetrators, if we could focus on the victim.
Right.
Because, that's the one thing about it. These things come into the news. And right now, if you looked up Colleen's name, this is kind of sad. You looked up Colleen's name right now and did a Google search on her. Well, it's not her name that's going to pop up.
Nope.
It's Christa Pike's. And that's the way it always happens with capital punishment cases, because the victims most of the time are a distant memory. There's someone, that is, I don't know, for people in the modern context, and I say that, 30 years later, modern context, they no longer have, there's not even really a remnant around of these individuals other than the loved ones. And this is probably the most important, but other than the loved ones that hold their memory, dear, they're the ones that sit in silence,
right?
All these years wanting some kind of answer. And most of the time you get people chirping in and chiming in about how evil the death penalty is. And they not necessarily have given two hoots in hell about this person to begin with.
I did a Google search when you said that. I typed in Colleen Slemmer. Yeah. And immediately it pops up. And here are the top stories that popped up, the headlines, right? I've got 5 pictures pop up on the screen with stories associated with them. All of them are pictures of Christa Pike.
Yeah.
And USA Today, Fox News, People.com, and so on. And it's all about execution date set for Christa Pike. And again, 30 years after the fact, Joe. And why do they give her a year out? Because as we're talking about this, they just set the execution date, and it's for a year away.
A year away.
Why isn't it not 48 hours? I mean, you've had 30 years. After 30 years, if you haven't found a reason to not carry this out, I'm going to say, I think whenever there's a death penalty case, I know that it's an automatic appeal, which I get that, not a problem. Examine all the things that took place, and because you got to remember, to get to that conviction, a jury of your peers sat, they heard all the evidence, they went over everything, and they decided unanimously that this person deserved death as a punishment, as a penalty for their crime. It wasn't willy-nilly. It wasn't, it was monitored the entire time, how the attorneys handled it all the way through the judge. I mean, there's all kinds of safeguards in there.
Yeah, there are. And as a matter of fact, coming to attorneys in most states, and I don't know if our friends are aware of this, but in most states, if you're going to be on I think it applies to prosecution and defense. If you're going to be on either of those teams, you have to be death penalty qualified, right, in order to move forward with a case where you've got capital punishment, staring down the accused at that point in time. That goes to this idea of protections, because it's so much more complex based upon, this thing, if there is a guilty, and if there is sentencing that winds up in capital punishment, it's automatic appeal, dude. Right. It's not like it's going to be backburnered or anything like that. So there's been, over 30 years, there have been a series of appeals that have been filed in this case. I'm still stumped by the idea that you need a year in order to do this, unless the prosecution, they're preparing for whatever new appeal might pop up. But again, you can't necessarily force it through the courts in any particular way. So that's compelling. And here's the other thing I think that's really kind of interesting here is that allegedly what they're saying, the reason I think it kind of made it into the algorithm again is that she's like the first female in 200 years that Tennessee is going to put to death, or over the 200-year history of capital punishment, she's like a number one. So she's been bumped up the line, you know, ahead of everybody else, any other females that might be sitting on death row, you know, in Tennessee. And there's not a lot of females on death row around America.
Christa Pike's the only one in Tennessee.
Yeah.
And let's see. Yeah, Tennessee has not carried out an execution of a woman since the death penalty was reinstated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And again,
and
all of that's, you know, it goes back to what you were saying a minute ago, Joe, that the victim is left out of all of this.
They are,
you know, for 30 years. Colleen Slemmer, she was killed by this woman, and this woman was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death
in the most brutal way. And listen, I love what you said earlier about the this, you know, when I get into the level of brutality that was exacted upon this young woman, Colleen, you think about, you know, when you're a kid and you're in high school, or whatever, and you're in my hometown, they used to call us fender lizards. And those were the individuals that would pull into the parking lot at Hardee's or McDonald's, and you just hang out in your car, right?
Fender lizards?
They were called fender lizards, and there was actually a city statute that was put forward in the small southern town about you can't be a fender lizard, you know, move on, it's loitering or whatever the case might be. But you know, back then during those periods of time when you're young and, you know, you're if there was a conflict over a relationship, you might have two guys that, you know, that have fisticuffs over it, and that's it. That's not what this is about. This is about a case of, and I love these two terms, luring and menacing. And what it comes down to is that both of those elements wind up equaling pure evil. So I'm not really familiar with Job Corps necessarily, Dave. I understand the principle. I understand that it gives you an opportunity to seek out employment and providing kind of a backstop for you, so that, you know, if you're in a life situation where you're not going to get further education necessarily, they have opportunities for people to do that. To get some kind of technical training or get kind of absorbed into the workforce. And, you know, you've got these individuals that were around Colleen in this Job Corps program that was actually, they were being housed in a dorm that was not too far away from University of Tennessee campus. As a matter of fact, I think where this
campus
actually
comes into play.
Yeah, the campus does, because it's like part of their ag program, you know, at UT, their agricultural, you know, majors and that sort of thing. And this is kind of an old abandoned area that was on the property, wasn't it, Dave?
It was. To give you an idea of what Job Corps is, and I pulled up the easiest explanation is it is a U.S. Department of Labor funded no cost career technical training. I think it was a little different 30 years ago than it is now, but Colleen Slemmer was a part of Job Corps, as was Christa Pike and Tadaryl Shipp. And we have others involved in this, but just staying right where we are, there are interpersonal relationships that develop between the people of Job Corps. Remember, they are living together, eating together, going to classes together. I mean, it's an environment that, you know, you get to know people. You make best friends there for the rest of your life, or lifelong enemies, depending on who you have. And in this case, Christa Pike was dating a guy named Tadaryl Shipp, and she believed that Colleen Slemmer was trying to lure Tadaryl Shipp away in a romantic relationship. Everybody that the police interviewed, everybody that talked about the situation said Colleen and Tadaryl were friendly, but not in that way. They were friendly as just we're in the program together, They were friends, but nothing more than that. But Christa Pike didn't like Colleen and thought there was something going on between Tadaryl and Colleen. So, and so she decided to take it into her own hands, and they being Christa Pike, Tadaryl Shipp, and one other person who ended up becoming state's evidence, who got probation. And got a problem for somebody being involved in the death of another person, whether they're just as a lookout or anything else. They're involved in this case. Her last name is Pederson. She ended up with probation. She didn't even go to jail, but
Shadolla
yeah,
Pederson.
thank you.
Yep.
Yeah. So they being the three lure Colleen to the campus.
Yeah, and it's an old abandoned steam plant. I got to tell you, when I heard that, you know what it made me think of? I'm thinking about how ominous this thing probably looks. It looked like the set of like a Batman movie, where everything's kind of dark. Yeah, and they used the opportunity to get her back there. They said, "Come on, let's go smoke weed together."
Right.
Well, this is not like a spontaneous kind of event where there's some kind of act that triggers somebody immediately where they get into a fight. No, they came prepared, knowing what the purpose was there. They're going to take her to this location that, just the ominous nature of this abandoned steam plant, it's not going to attract anybody else. It's you've got this young girl, Colleen, in a state of isolation there. And suddenly, you've got Christa Pike, who literally begins to attack her along with this other individual that's there, that's supposed to be, I guess, the love of her life.
Tadaryl Shipp.
Yeah. And who, by the way, just as a little aside, this guy, next week, as of this recording, this guy is, hang on your hat, Dave, this guy's up for parole hearing, the first parole hearing.
October 8th.
Yeah. He's gonna have, and he's in his 40s. Christa Pike is sitting on death row. So that kind of shows you the relationship between these two, the level of responsibility that they equate to Christa Pike as opposed to this, to this person that she, has, romantic desires upon.
The one thing you mentioned about them going to smoke weed, Joe, is that the reason, or the way that comes about and comes into play here, is that Christa Pike, there had been animosity. There was a known situation here, not with just them, but with others. And that's where Christa Pike reaches out to Colleen and says, we're going to get together, we're going to meet, and we're going to smoke weed. We're going to smoke the peace pipe, that kind of thing. Mm-hmm. And that was the whole point. The smoking of the weed was to seal the deal that this animosity was going to stop, that everything was fine. We're all going to be buddies and pals. And of course, that was the way she lured her. But you mentioned coming prepared. What did Christa Pike carry with her, Joe, that she used in this? In this murder.
Yeah, I think that's, Lord have mercy. Talk about the tools of death. Just so people understand, they came prepared with both a box cutter and, Dave, a meat cleaver. When was the last time we talked about a meat cleaver? I don't remember it. Now, it's been used in movies, for years and years. And I have worked a case involving a meat cleaver, but they show up with a meat cleaver. Well, what's the purpose of a meat cleaver? Well, from a forensic standpoint, you have what are referred to, and these are sharp force injuries that are generated by one of these things. these are chopping injuries, and they're kind of distinct from, say, the edge of a blade, um, uh, where you're dragging the edge of a blade across the surface of the skin. Um, Interestingly enough, meat cleavers actually have some characteristics of blunt force trauma that can be appreciated, particularly in the depth of the wound. You get into the bone, perhaps if you've got like if somebody struck on the collarbone, all right, with a meat cleaver, you're going to have this kind of fragmenting of the bone, but it'll still but on the other hand, it'll kind of have a clean edge to it. Okay, so it kind of, and you'll see you can see contused areas when anybody's using an axe, if there's been an axe attack, or a cleaver, which many times are associated with blunt force because you're pounding and tearing that skin at the same time. It's not as neat as you might think that it is, but they showed up here, with these instruments, and not to mention what also comes into play here, Dave, is a chunk of asphalt. Okay, so this is going to be a blunt object that's going to be used as a bludgeon at some point in time. Interestingly enough, injuries many times when you use something like a piece of asphalt, even though it's heavy, it's firm, the surface area of a fragmented piece of asphalt, you can actually have bits of it that will break off in injury. So when you're kind of going through this kind of layered examination of a strike to the skin, did you know you can actually see bits of fragmented asphalt in there? I've seen it with concrete as well. I've seen it with brick. You'll see little bitty features, and you can certainly see them at a microscopic level if you take a sample of that tissue and put it on a slide.
Colleen Slemmer was beaten for at least 30 minutes.
Yep.
And the only comment from Christa Pike was saying, "The bitch won't die."
Yeah. Well,
what did they do to her body? How did that beating go, Joe?
Yeah, well, let me give you one more insight. There was one other thing that Christa Pike allegedly said at this time, and it gives you an indication of a level of violence that she was willing to inflict upon Colleen. She said, "I want to see her brains flow." So she's purposed, all right? She's purposed in the fact that not only is it on her menu here, if you will, to inflict sharp force injuries on Colleen by repeatedly striking her with a meat cleaver. She wants to see her skull crushed to the point where, and this does happen, where you will see brain beginning to extrude from a skull. It takes multiple strikes most of the time to kind of invade the cranial vault, and once it's cracked open, those fracture lines begin to kind of spiderweb all over the place. And with each repeated strike, you'll see these flaps that will open up. I've seen this happen with hammer attacks. I've seen it happen in motor vehicle accidents, but there has to be a tremendous amount of force that's literally directed at the head in order to facilitate that. That's obviously motor vehicle. That's a single strike. This would have taken multiple strikes, probably with this piece of asphalt, in order to get inside of the cranial vault, where you're going to see the brain extruding, and it's called extrusion. Extrusion is what it's referred to as. And there's another point here that we have to consider. Not only is she literally tormenting this poor girl with all of these injuries that she sustained, Dave, she took this box cutter and carved a pentagram on her chest. You know, and pentagram's an inverted star, 5-pointed star. That's associated many times with satanic worship. And in my experience, people that do this sort of thing don't necessarily have. They might think that they're involved in satanic worship. Many times it's left as just kind of a horrific calling card along the way. And I can't imagine that this person, Christa Pike, was intellectually sophisticated enough to be the leader of a satanic coven, if you will. All right, this is something where she's just trying to be as horrible and try to be as debased as you possibly can, and that's what happened with Colleen. Interestingly enough, Colleen had done so much. I'm sorry, strike that, Dave. 3, 2. Pike had done so much damage to Colleen that in the wake of all of this, Dave, she's not only taunting her, making these statements like the bitch won't die, I want to see her blood flow. She's a souvenir taker, Dave. She's a souvenir taker. Christa Pike took a portion of Colleen's skull, and in the wake of having committed this horrible murder, torture murder, she takes this bit of skull with her and begins to proudly display it to people, Dave.
How tough would it be, Joe, to even get a piece of skull?
Nothing. It would. The thing about it is our scalp is literally adherent to our skull with fascia, which is this kind of thin membrane. If you take your fingertips and you touch your scalp right now, you can actually move your scalp over the surface of your skull. You want it to do that because if it's static, you're going to have problems. Okay. So, but once you have erupted this area and torn this bit of scalp away, it would be nothing to reach down and dislodge a chunk of skull, even by the fascia connection that you have to that layer of the scalp. Just kind of lightly pull it away, and there you've got, like, I don't know, a triangular piece of skull that you're walking around with. Hey, everybody, look what I've got here. You know, it's not like she's walking around displaying a gold medal for some grand achievement that she might have had with Job Corps or some athletic prowess. No, she's got a bit of Colleen's skull that is now trophied for her. The big question is this, I think. Is this actually a sign of mental illness? Because that's the big question here, isn't it? And that's what the defense wants you to believe, that she's got multiple psychiatric diagnoses. She's got PTSD from previous sexual abuse. There's been talk that she had done drugs with her mother at some point in time. But does all of that trump beating and carving up a young woman and taking a bit of her body with her that she should not be held responsible for? Somewhere out there, Colleen's remains exist. All that's left of her. And we're 30 years downrange. You sit there and think of all of the potential that existed within her, and also the children she may have had, the potential that existed in them, the hopes that maybe the ones that loved her had for her moving forward. That's gone. It's completely gone now. All over this kind of senseless, just nonsensical behavior on the part of Christa Pike and these other people that she drug into this as well. And look, I mean, I'm not saying that those individuals should not be fully held to account for what they did. They actively participated in this. At some point in time, you have to recognize that we're creatures of free will. We're going to make decisions, and I don't care really how old you are. You're going to make decisions about the activities you engage in. It's a real shame. I think that many in society want people just to, well, let's forget about this free will decision that they made, and we're gonna start over. Well, go tell that to Colleen's family, and look, whether or not you agree with the death penalty or not, be either hot or cold on it. Don't sit in the middle of the road. If you don't believe in the death penalty, that's fine. But she doesn't need to see the light of day again. So, I think the big question is that prosecutors many times I think are faced with. They have to weigh the risk here, because listen, at the time, I'm sure the public was screaming, "We want blood."
I was looking at a couple of the comments by Christa Pike when she gave her story of what took place. There was a wound to the back of Colleen Slemmer that they were trying to figure out, where did this come from? How did this happen? And one was a long cut down her back. And Christa Pike said, well, she kept getting up and trying to run away, and she would be tackled and beat again. So Colleen, for 30 or 40 minutes, Joe, is fighting for her life against an armed woman she's got a cleaver and a box cutter. And from the very beginning, for anybody who has ever been in a fight, if you've ever caught a knee to the head, I'm going to tell you, I have caught a knee to the head. It knocks you into the middle of next week. And according to Christa Pike, that was the first thing she did. This attack was by surprise. Remember, they were there to smoke the peace pipe. And Christa Pike starts pounding away and knees her head. That's what she says. Kicks her in the head, knees her in the head, kicks her in the body. And I mean, she is terrorizing the body of Colleen Slemmer. And again, when she mentioned that I want to see her brains flow out, she lifts a large chunk of asphalt paving over Slemmer's head and proceeded to smash her skull until brain matter started flowing out of her head. Christa Pike shared that information. This was not something that investigators think happened, or that they built to a timeline of how it happened, based on evidence. This is the story told to them by Christa Pike, that she used the asphalt to slam over Colleen Slemmer's head over and over and over until the brain matter flowed. And then she grabbed that chunk of skull as a souvenir and showed it off the next day at school.
Yeah.
They're in the cafeteria eating. And here's Christa. Hey, where's Colleen? I don't know. Where is Colleen today? But look what I've got. I've got a skull.
Yeah. Yeah. So
fresh skull.
Yeah. Fresh
Joseph
skull. And
Scott
she,
Morgan.
her thing about it is when she picked this up, when she picked up that bit of skull, there would have been some cleaning that would have had to have taken place, because you would still have some tissue, you'd certainly have some blood that was on there. I wonder if she took this young woman's skull and that fragmented piece and rubbed it off on her pants, or stuck it in her pocket, merely waiting for it to dry out as she, kind of dances away from the scene, leaving Colleen's remains there. But you had asked me a critical question, Dave, few moments ago, how do we get to capital punishment in this particular case? Well, if you look at the statute in Tennessee, there are multiple different paths you can take to get to first degree murder that can be, punished, with the death penalty. And with first degree, you actually there's these aggravating factors. We hear about aggravating factors, and the one that this case in particular meets is that there is a subsection to it that the way you define it, the murder, and I quote, the murder was especially heinous, atrocious, and cruel in that it involved, here's the word, Dave, torture, serious physical abuse beyond that necessary to produce death. So if you look at this and if you had the utility to bring about her death in I hate to even use the term humane, but in a quicker manner. I mean, you yourself said that, that she's languishing, and she was, Dave. She had a full awareness of it. She's responding to pain. It didn't start off with the most fatal thing, all right? You don't have the skull crushing that happens at the beginning. She's trying to get away. She's fighting for her life, okay, at this point in time. When these choices are being exacted upon Colleen, these choices that are made by Pike, for every one of those, this is leading up to the grand finale. It's the totality of that makes this so heinous. This is not like somebody, mob style, taking somebody out and executing them by shooting them in the back of the head and walking off from their body. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something that where this young woman is languishing. And then I think that probably the other part of this that goes to the heinous nature of it, and I'd be very curious from the perspective of a legal scholar. Does that heinous behavior, can that be evidenced as part of the recipe, if you will, for capital punishment? Can it be evidenced in bringing a bit of skull with you to display it to everybody? I mean, to me, that's heinous. All right. It's horrific, absolutely horrific. But can that be evidence to go into the bigger mix when the DA is trying to decide? Or is it just those things that happen in that moment where, death is going to happen? I'm not saying that she probably would have eventually died from these other traumas, maybe. But it would have been, it was quickened, certainly, I think, by picking up the bit of asphalt. I don't think you can define that as mercy, though, on any level or any less heinous. She's been kicked, cut, carved on. And the idea that in any way that what was exacted upon Colleen was merciful. This was something that was intended to be drawn out over a protracted period of time. And listen, people don't like to use the word evil, Dave. They shy away from it. Evil's real. It's truly real. I take exception to people that try to say, well, this is a sign of mental illness. This is not some moral thing where we can define them as evil. I beg to differ on that point. This is the fruit of evil that you're seeing played out here. I think that people want some kind of other explanation to try to comfort themselves in some way that evil doesn't exist, that it's all mental illness, and I just don't see this. This group set about ending Colleen's life. And now it would seem that the state of Tennessee has decided to move forward in this case. Again, I find it very odd that we've got a window of a year now after 30 years. Isn't that kind of curious, man?
That is very. You mentioned we, they as a plural, they did this. Well, for those who might think, well, Tadaryl Shipp must not have been very involved, since he was given life with the possibility of parole after 25 years. But, as part of the story, as told by Christa Pike and played for the jury, that after the beating began and, Colleen kept trying to run away, it was Tadaryl Shipp that actually grabbed her back, brought her down, held her down while Christa Pike used that box cutter to carve into her chest and stomach. And by the way, according to Christa Pike, Colleen was screaming in pain the whole time.
Yeah. She
was begging.
Yeah.
Knowing what was at stake. She said, I will walk back to Florida if you'll just let me go. I will leave. I will walk. I won't tell anybody what has happened. She's begging for her life. Tadaryl Shipp is holding her down while Christa Pike does this with that box cutter. So he's coming up for parole next week. And I want you to remember what he did. Now, the other woman involved who, copped a plea deal, she was standing guard, which, again, I'm not willing to go that far when you've got an admission of guilt by the perpetrator. You've got a story that matches the evidence, Joe. And by the way, it didn't take long, okay? This crime took place the night of January 12th, the day of January 13th when Colleen Slemmer doesn't show up to eat. And that, at the same time, Christa Pike is showing off pieces of her skull. Police are notified. They begin looking into it right away after her body is found. It doesn't take long on the 14th. We're talking 36 hours after the murder. Police already have the principals in jail. They've got them sitting there, got the interview from Christa Pike after reading her Miranda. They've got Tadaryl Shipp, and they've got, they already got everything. They didn't need to cop a plea deal with the girl standing lookout for this whole thing, but they did. So they gave her probation. They get Tadaryl Shipp for life with possibility of parole after 25 years. And finally, now they're going to put Christa Pike to death for what she did. But again, it's already been 30 plus years, and now she gets another year. Is that a form of torture? It's finally here. Mark, this is the last time you're ever going to see this date on the calendar.
Yeah.
You're not going to see another, I'm for the life of me trying to figure out, you're carrying out a sentence you've had 30 plus years.
Yeah.
Really?
I don't.
Why do we have to wait?
I don't know. I don't understand it, and I'm sure that there are legal scholars out there that would be able to certainly explain it. It just seems it's a rather odd road to go down, to me at least. It's not like you're the maitre d' is taking your name down at the to check in. Well, we'll get to you when we can. Your table will soon be available. It's not like they have a huge list of people that are waiting to do this, and that you've had this much time that has clicked off of the clock. Colleen's time ended, I guess, a bit more mercifully in one sense, is that she's done with the pain now. Christa Pike has got to sit there in that cell for a bit longer, and they're going to take her maybe a year from now. They're going to initiate an IV site on her arm. They're going to lead her into that room. And unlike in other states that use lethal injection, Tennessee only uses one drug. There is no cocktail. It's phenobarbital. And she will be allowed to slip off into unconsciousness. Her lungs will begin to shut down. Her heart will cease to beat. And all memories that she may have created and any hope she may have had from walking out of that institution will be at an end. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.